Hi, CJ.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Congratulations. This film is mesmerizing. It mixes fantasy with fable, the intricacies of a closed-off village, women's agency, the politics of an uprising. I mean, there's so much to mull over. My head is still spinning from everything. I wonder if you could start at the beginning and just talk us through the origins of the idea. Was it fully formed, or did it come to you in parts? It'd be great to know, like, the context for how it was developed.
Well, first, thank you to everyone for coming and for staying for the Q&A. Really love this cinema. Has this classic feel. Yeah, I love it. I would say yes and no, because I would say the essence of it came to me fully formed, but to get to that point took a long time. I had to really work on myself, and I had to work on just my skill level, I guess, in terms of writing, as well as in terms of being able to execute something that had a sort of spiritual gravitas to it, because we are all going through our various things individually, our own spiritual journeys. But I felt like with this particular film, I needed to go through a sort of baptism in a way, to be able to convey the truth and the authenticity of a place like E, fictional or not. But it really is rooted in the very specific spirituality of a particular region and of a particular people. And so to tap into that, it took a lot of work. It took a lot of writing and rewriting. The first couple of years, I must have written 9 or 10 drafts, and then I trashed every single one of them, and then restarted the process. And then I started doing a more internal, personal work of asking myself why I needed to make the film, what it really was about, who am I talking about. Yes, it's a movie about Mami Wata, but there's a truth to it in reference to myself as well, in reference to wanting to remember my sisters, who I lost 2 years apart, and then that began to allow me to write, to flesh out these characters, Zinwe and Priska, even more. And then I think that was the Da Vinci Code, I would say, that really made it work.
Thank you for that. And you can really feel that love and intention with those two characters in particular, Zinwe and Spectra, because they are, the heart of the film. Yeah. And we essentially see the film through their trajectory. Yeah. I was stuck on 9 or 10 drafts. That's an incredible amount of work, and really shows your passion for this project. But also, I'm just curious about the world building, because, like I said, there are so many aspects to this, the conflicts in the village, but without science or technology, Mama Efe losing her sense of power, female agency, the role of water, which is always like anchoring the film, as well as encompassing that spiritual element. So with so many elements there, how do you create something that feels so potent to me? And like you said, it kind of moves beyond the physical. It feels like the sort of film that was transformational for you. Absolutely. During the process. And that kind of work takes a certain level of sacrifice and compromise. So I would love to know about cultivating and creating that world.
I think that came from just a willingness to just a humbleness, just a humility to just allow the process to happen the way it was supposed to happen. The first 2 years, like I said, I was working on this very genre type film, like a very traditional kind of genre film. And I'm a genre guy. That's really where I come from. But just instinctively, I knew that this movie had to transcend genre. And so But to get to that point, that was the real challenge. I did those. I mean, after the first 9-10 drafts, I mean, I started going to labs. I started on a lab in in the Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, called the Ouaga Film Lab, and I think that really changed my trajectory because prior to that, I was in Nigeria pitching the project to several people, friends, family, anybody really who could listen, and most of the reactions I got was always like on the negative, spectrum of things. Just, don't do it either for religious purposes. Don't do it because it's black and white. Don't do it, like it was always don't. But when I went to Burkina, I got a different reaction. I got a reaction of people who really appreciated the fact that somebody wanted to tell a story about Mami Wata. And they have their own experience of Mami Wata in Burkina, just like the people from Senegal have their own experience. The people from Mali, from Niger, from Ivory Coast, from the Gambia. Everyone has a different experience, but they all refer to this deity as Mami Wata. Just like we do in Nigeria. And so it is no longer a Nigerian story from that point of view. And so that made me to start to, I guess, think of dichotomy. And that would be like the birthing seeds of what led me to a new path towards the story. As soon as I started thinking of dichotomy, I started thinking of archetypes and how dichotomy works through society, modernity versus tradition, old versus new. And once I started working out those elements in the script, I realized I needed something else. And it took me a while to realize that what I needed was balance. And that's how Priska's character was born.
Yeah, she's an incredible character. She goes through so much. So I was going to ask about the fact that it's such an African film. For me, that's really powerful because it doesn't seem to be courting a Western gaze. Everything from the pidgin English to, the painting of the facial markings, the costuming, the landscapes. Everything is so African and it's so unapologetic. Yeah. So I wondered if you could talk about that, whether there were whisperings in your ear, when you were saying, there was some negativity. Mm-hmm. I wonder if there were whisperings about, well, maybe you could consider doing something a bit more commercially viable or something that would appeal more to a mainstream audience. The fact that the film is so black is really amazing. But it has that, but it transcends that as well. So I wondered if you could talk a bit about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, from the very beginning, people told us right from the start, don't make it in black and white. I know people who I thought were my friends, who they are really rich people who. And I'm not like the entitled kind of person, if I have rich friends, that's your money. But I mean, some of these people, they could have, the money I needed for the movie, they blow that shit on vacations. So I'm like, okay, what would you invest in this movie? This really cool idea? And they're like, yeah, we'll invest in it, only if you make it in color though. So like it was just really weird. We getting that sort of response, and it started happening over and over and again, and people were just stuck on this fact that I wanted to make it in black and white. And at first it used to be, why do you want to make it in black and white? And I just go, because I want to. But at some point I realized it had a lot to do with my a sentimental reason why I was drawn to black and white. Just growing up watching films in black and white on a black and white TV, because our color TV was struck by lightning and we didn't have a color TV anymore. So we watched everything on black and white, and just the fact that every film I fell in love with, growing up as a child was on that black and white TV. And it's crazy. Something happened in my memory that some of those films, even till now, I still remember them in black and white, even though I've seen them dozens of times in color since then. So there's something about black and white that it draws me back to, the basics of the craft of cinema and my love for cinema. And that's what I wanted to tap into with making this film. And the challenges were numerous, of course, but I never really think that what I do is not commercial, which might be a little cocky, but I just never see it that way. I always think that anything I do will find an audience, somehow. And I know people describe it as art houses, and I do love art house. I mean, clearly, I'm very influenced by
African art house.
every kind. I know. I love African, and I love every kind. I love cinema. That's really the core of it. I love all kinds of cinema. But yeah, my favorite film of all time will always be Yelin by Suleiman Cisse. So that's like. If I had like one big reference to this film, which I don't really have, we didn't really have references for this film. But if I had
I'm going to come to that.
Yeah, but one, if I was to say one reference, maybe not in terms of the style or aesthetic, but just in terms of the philosophy of telling unapologetically African stories, it would be Yelin. But yeah, no, I really never, I didn't think of those things as challenges, even while they were happening, because I knew there had to be one way to make this film, and I just wasn't willing to do it any other way.
And I suppose it's that thing with any sort of art, it's about finding the people that believe in it and believe in your voice and want to support it in the best way possible and help you create that space. Having seen it, I cannot imagine it any other way but black and white. Exactly. When you talk about that spiritual element, I feel like it lends itself so well because it's so stark. It's almost stripped down, but has this potency to it that's really, really incredible. So yeah, I think that was a wonderful choice. I want to ask you about the influence of African folklore. I grew up hearing about Mami Wata, also things like Igbabo Lemelimin and Boma Boma, like the spirit that would take you if you were a child and chop you up to make money. I was terrified of that as a kid. So I remember hearing things like that. And there are so many. Why Mami Wata specifically? I'm really curious about that choice because, there are so many different directions you could have gone in. So many amazing folkloric stories, but why Mami Wata in particular? Is it because throughout Africa, every country knows it and has some sort of connection to it?
Yeah, that's partly the reason. I feel like those urban legends or things you mentioned, they are more or less that's just what they are, urban legends, and they're very regional. Mami Wata transcends urban legend. It's a religion, it's a cult, it's a real way of life. If you go to different parts of West Africa, people still worship Mami Wata till this very day. I mean, if you go to the Americas, you go to, Brazil, Cuba, different parts of the world, they still recognize Mami Wata and worship her as a deity in her own right. Where I live now, Benin Republic, I have Mami Wata shrines, right next to my house, so like it's still very much a real experience for people. So in going into that, and that's where we shot the film, by the way. We shot it in Benin Republic, and we shot it during the Voodoo Festival where Mami Wata is venerated. So we really were in it, it wasn't just something we made for fun. I mean, sure, we had fun, but it was really a true spiritual experience. Being there, tapping into that energy. Even before we started filming with my DOP Lilis, who is Brazilian, and she's Afro-Brazilian, and her own journey on her path was identifying with her Orisha, which is Yamoja, and the water spirit, the water deity of Yoruba tradition, Ifa religion, and she was on that journey before I even met her. So it felt like destiny, in a lot of ways. And by the time she had undergone her initiation, she knew what she wanted to do as far as working on this film with black and white, and how we capture dark skin, and how we highlight, how we center dark skin, because that's another thing. We weren't afraid of getting close, All the characters, you see them close because we wanted them to fill up the screen, to have them
stunning. The way dark skin is shot is so beautiful. Almost I found it moving, but also kind of magical as well. They kind of on the screen larger than life, but there is a prideness there, and there's a beauty there. It's not apologetic in any way.
No, it's not. I mean, the idea is that there's a lot of unspoken politics, sometimes spoken to, about how to shoot dark skin in film in general. A few filmmakers have tried to push the envelope, and we have great works by Bradford Young.
He's incredible.
Yeah, like there are a lot of fantastic black cinematographers who've done
Arthur Jafar,
N.S. Dickerson, who've done fantastic work in that space. But what I found was that when it comes to dark skin, there's a lot of expectations about what to do or what not to do. Even sometimes it's sort of subtle. So for example, you wouldn't, let's not have too many night scenes, or if we have night scenes, let's like overly saturate the thing with light. So if you find dark skinned people in night scenes, it's usually like under neon lights, with a lot of like just a lot of lights, colored lights and things, just to see them, and I couldn't do that because first it's not a colored film, so I only had black and white. So I felt it was important to prove that you could do that, even though they said you couldn't. And I'll tell you something. In the original script, I had maybe 1/3 of the script were night scenes, but by the time we realized what we were doing, I changed it to 3/4 of the film to night scenes, just because I wanted it to be very clear what we were doing, so nobody would ever say that anymore. So you could always say, "Oh, go watch Mami Wata if you think it's not possible," I know it was a little cocky, but I felt like it had to be done just for the tradition to change, for the mindset to change. And sometimes films can be political, but I think the most powerful way a film can be political is through images, perspective. You mentioned how there's dignity in how they look, and that's another layer to it. They had to be filmed deliberately that way to have dignity, because a lot of times African cinema, even the most celebrated African cinema that I love, some of the ones that I love, we don't always film Africans with dignity. We film them with a certain kind of sympathy. I call it the sympathetic gaze, whereas we were going for a more empathetic gaze. Empathy means I'm human, you're human. So like you're not thinking of it in terms of, look at them Africans in some African village. It's a different perspective.
Yeah, it didn't feel like that at all. Exactly. It felt like you were brought into this world with these incredible characters and these tensions, and you were invested in the story. Yeah. So obviously it's what you're doing is subversive and radical, but also bold. It's kind of pushing the envelope in terms of changing that mindset, like you said, which is so important. And if we don't use our agency as Black creators to do that, how do we expect it to change in a way? So, it's fantastic that it's not cockiness, actually. It's just like having that confidence and that. Yeah,
confidence is what I call it. It's confidence, because I really believe in the beauty. I really believe in beauty, and beauty standards are so messed up. As far as filmmaking, as far as cinema, beauty standards. Go through history and look at how Africans are filmed, and look at how every other person is filmed. It's right there. So there's something inherently wrong with how we film. It's even a cop out to say, it's a Western problem. We fall into that problem as well. African filmmakers.
Where do you think that comes from, though? Because obviously that came from somewhere. Do you think that came from a white Western gaze and was adopted, or that's what I would imagine would happen, because
it's a programming.
How did they learn the process of filmmaking? It's through that colonial gaze in a way.
Yeah.
And we adopt the same processes, and only if we interrogate what we're
And
doing
deprogram.
and deprogram can we change it.
Yeah, so that's part of the thing I had to do. You know, like I had to really work at it intentionally. My DOP and I, we would have conversation after conversation after conversation about each scene, and then we would come back and have the same conversation over and over again before we even film. Like even while we were filming, we would have conversations about what we were doing and how, you know, how to do something or how not to do something. So it was always a constant interrogation, for sure. I mean, we didn't arrive at having it all figured out, for sure. So we approached it from a point of this is how it is done. We haven't done this before. We don't know anyone who has done this before. But if we can try this and it works, then we can succeed and we can figure out how to do the next thing. And so it was always about this conversation and having it back and forth and trying the lighting, how to put the light, you know, how to put the, you know, Priska in silhouette against the, you know, the forest, you know, for example. Like, how do we want her to look? What do we want that image to say? How do we put, you know, juxtapose her against the night? How do we, all of these things, you know, sometimes we would put symbols in the imagery. We would have, you know, have her, you know, hold on to her sister, and that would be like us juxtaposing her, the image of the Virgin Mary holding on to Christ, because we wanted these images to mean something. You know, we would have, you know, we would put her in halo, because we don't see African women, you know, as gods or as or goddesses, you know. So like we really intentionally built these codes into the images, for sure.
That's amazing. It's funny you were saying that there were no specific references, but I was watching it thinking of Julie Dash's film Daughters of the Dust. I thought I was thinking of other references, Chinua Achebe. I thought of Nndi Okorafor. All these. So
maybe I should clarify when I say no references. I'm talking about like stylistically, maybe aesthetically, but philosophically, idealistically, even story to a large extent, narratively. I'm inspired by all of these, you know, these people that you mentioned. I mean, Chinua Achebe is probably like my biggest inspiration as far as writing, as far as prose.
Greatest.
I mean, like, you know, so that's certainly very present. I mean, just even the idea of things fall apart, it really resonates with this film, you know.
Well, the scene with the ladies wrestling immediately made me think of things falling apart, actually.
So in that sense, but like what I was talking about, references are, you know, like when you're building a movie visually, you're supposed to say, oh, we want to do something that looks like this or something that looks like that. So we didn't really have any direct references for that. Like even the black and white, it's so very specific to this film. It's a highly contrasted black and white that doesn't lose the, you know, the dark skin while being highly contrasted at the same time. You just don't see that.
I love that these films and these references are all in conversation with each other. And I think, you know, we have a great crop of diasporic African filmmakers at the moment. So Blitz Bazawule, incredible. Mati Diop. In fact, I was thinking about Atlantics, even though it's very different, but the kind of incorporation of the sea and the way it's used to anchor the narrative, as well as be something mysterious and otherworldly, made me think of that film. And then Alice Diop and her extraordinary film Saint Omer as well. So like, I feel like it's really an exciting time in terms of African filmmakers, because you're all pushing the envelope and everybody brings something unique to the table.
Absolutely.
And you're doing that, you know, you're crossing genres with your film. So Ojuju, that was like a zombie flick. O-Town was like a crime art house. And then Hello Motto, that was your collaboration with the incredible Nndi Okorafor. How do you feel that your work sits within that landscape of new, exciting, diasporic African filmmakers, and what do you want people to take away from your work?
I mean, one thing we've never lacked is talent. You know, the continent is so full. Like, we've barely even scratched the surface as far as talent. It's just too much talent in the continent. It's exciting. It's really exciting to see what's going to be coming out in the next 4, 5, 6 years from now. I know. I mean, I'm friends with some of these people, so I know it's going to be crazy. But I think my only one concern is just the direction that this talent could potentially go, because it could go either way. It could go, the right way, or it could go the wrong way. So that's my only concern. And trust me, there are elements that want it to go the wrong way. And so it's just a question of like how much do you care? How much do you care about the narrative, the stories? How much do you care about the images that you want to put out about us? So if you really care, then it's a little harder to make it. It's just a little, they make it a little harder for you to make it.
A little tougher.
A little tougher to make it.
I always find that actually there's truth in that. If you're not just if you really care, but if you want to do something different.
Yeah, it's just
something that's
it's just slightly harder than if you just wanted to just do something. If you wanted to do something just because it's cool, like it's just cool stuff to do, it could work out for you a little bit easier. But if you want to make something that has layers and has meaning and is a spiritual experience, and it's it has depth, and it's like people can have a fellowship while they watch, it's just slightly harder.
Absolutely. So Peter Bradshaw, who's the film critic in The Guardian, describes your film as the sleek images of this film are hypnotic. The faces are compelling and the hallucinatory finale is rather inspired, which is like a wonderful compliment.
Peter Bradshaw.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's getting so much traction, this film, which is amazing to see and so well deserved. What excites you about still being in this space, and can you talk a little bit about what you're working on next?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I try not to rest on the laurels, and they've been great. I mean, I also want to bask in it and enjoy it. And like yesterday, we were at the BFI, and that's like it was just so huge.
It's film heaven, isn't it?
I mean, the BFI, so it was really special. I want to like bask in those moments, and we had our premiere at Sundance. I wanted to bask in that, and I did. And it's been ongoing. All of these things, these experiences, being fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, like 100%. Things like that. I want to bask in it, but at the same time, I want to finish my script. Like I want to work on the next thing, because I don't take it for granted that it will always be like you always be the hottest guy. It doesn't always work out that way. You just have to keep plugging in, keep doing the work, have your next script ready.
Yeah.
Get back to the market.
It's funny, when I was speaking to Blitz Bazawole, he said a similar thing, that
He's
he
smart.
basically
he just made a Disney movie.
Yeah, he does like multiple things at once, because he can never quite trust that just one thing is going to pay off for him.
Right.
So it keeps him hungry and humble as well, which is great. And I love that you say you can't take anything for granted, but of course you should bask in this moment, and you should thoroughly enjoy it, because it's so well deserved. I think I want to open it up to audience questions. I'm sure you've all been like thinking and ruminating on things to ask him. Yeah, no, please do.
Hi.
Hello.
Firstly, again, happy birthday. I hope today's going exactly the way you want it to go.
Cool screening.
Also, congratulations on the awards you've won so far, and congratulations for the future awards you will win as well.
Thank you.
I don't know if there's a time limit per question, but I do have 3 questions, so I'll try and blast through them as quick as possible. The first one, as it's already been mentioned, is that this movie is unapologetically Black and African. I am curious, though, whether there were any aspects of the film that you had to discard because you genuinely felt that the audience wouldn't understand or it wouldn't transcend well across the screen.
Oh, that's easy. No.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Next question. Opinions are subjective, and it's possible that Mama Efe could be seen as a sort of villain because she allowed a child to die and didn't want the doctors to come into the village. Just curious, was that your intention?
Yeah, just to question it. Yes, to question tradition, because the idea wasn't to make tradition perfect or to present tradition as perfect. Just like the idea isn't to present modernity as perfect. So what was more interesting to me was to question these two opposites and allow us to look at another side, which is balance.
And my final question is, assuming I got this correctly, that at one point Zinwe stopped believing for a period. If that's the case, then why was it so important for her to keep the totem until her death?
She was wrestling with faith, just like we all do. I mean, she stopped believing, and I symbolized that physically when her facial mark disappeared from her face. So you know that she started to believe when it appeared again on her face. So that was a very real thing. But I mean, the totem is just a symbol. It's not really. It doesn't have power in of itself. It only is powerful to the one that is meant for it, or that is that position belongs to. So in the case, it was Priska, which is why it never worked for her. The idea really is to play around with these symbols, with these images, and for us to question what it is that is, tradition or important to. As an African, what does it mean to even be African? What does that even mean to be African in 2023? Does it mean to be more, more traditional? Go back to the old gods, to the old deities. Is that what's going to make you more African now? Or do you abandon everything African because it's old and embrace full-on modernity? Because those are the old ways. Which one is more African? Which one is more human? Is a more interesting question, I think. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for coming. This gives us a very rare and unique opportunity to speak to the writer and director of the film that we've just seen. I don't think I've ever experienced that before. That's absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Irensa, for putting this on. So I wanted to comment on your choice of the black and white. I think it gave it a timeless feel, yes. And I loved that. I could go into lots of things about the tone and everything, but you've already spoken on that. It is beautifully shot. Oscar for Best Art Director. Is it the picture art?
No, it's Nigeria's submission for the Oscar.
Yeah, it's in the wings. I can see it. So that was it. I thought it was interesting when you said that your favourite film was Yaline, because that's my second favourite film. My first favourite is Yaba. So both very, I guess, set in a pre-colonial time.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that appealed to me when I saw it in the 90s. I've forgotten the other one. Sorry, Starstruck. I'll move on. So thank you so much for being here. It's an amazing opportunity.
Appreciate it.
Any other questions? There's a lady at the back.
Yeah, but it's a cool film. Very cool. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for the film. It was really wonderful. I was wondering...
Sorry, I can't see.
Oh, I don't know how to illuminate myself more. You're coming down.
Yeah.
Do you want me to come all the way down? I can do that. Okay, I'll stay here. The question is the point.
There we go.
I'm wondering.
Thank you, whoever held that light up.
Mami Wata is such a the power of the deity is so connected to her femininity, and I was thinking about you mentioned earlier about the idea of balance with regard to modernity and tradition, but it also seemed a thing with regards to gender as well, and the performance of it. I was wondering how I think you're cited as the only writer on it. How you approached writing something that was so much about the power of women, and particularly given. Oh, also, I'm really curious about the character of Jasper. What was what was your idea behind what his or their gender was, and what that character meant?
Okay. To approach the writing, I mean, the writing was really a harrowing experience working on, because I had never delved deep. I've never worked on female characters like this, first of all, but also because I've never worked on anything so spiritual before, like not something that required this much really inner work. And like I mentioned, it really cracked open for me when I realized that I could mine from my memories of my sister. That really opened up the door, and it opened up the door to the rest of the story for me, not just for the characters, but for the entire story. And so that allowed me to write it with more confidence, because I was writing what I knew on a very intimate level. People that raised me, people that put philosophies into me, people that really shaped my way of thinking. And so that's really from the point of view that I wrote everything pretty much from. But to answer your question about Jasper, Jasper was also another interesting character. I mean, after I figured out Priska, I had to revisit Jasper, because Jasper was always already there. We had, I mean, if you think of how, I mean, you know, you're an author, you know how literature works. I mean, the structure of prose, you know, when you have like this village that is sort of like paradise, and you have an external person come in to upset that balance, right? So that was always there as far as Jasper. But after working on Priska to create this sort of multi-dimensional character, Priska, who is she respects tradition, but she's also very modern. You know, she's also fashionable. She drives a motorcycle. You know, like she's all of these different things, but she's also traditional. You know, so to have that character exist in a place like E that is still very much seeped into the old ways was, I think, what changed the game as far as creating Jasper, because I needed somebody who came from outside, like Priska in a way, that Priska could identify with, even if they are obviously not the same, but she could identify with her as far as she came outside, but she made this village her home. She became a part of the people, and the appeal there is that you can do that too, Jasper. And Jasper comes from a crazy world. He comes from war. I mean, he literally tells you everything that he's been through, and everything he says is true. He never really lies. That's the interesting thing about Jasper. He never really lies. He might hide the truth, like the full picture of the truth, but he doesn't really lie. The first thing he tells them is that he was one of the rebels. He came from rebels, and then he realized that rebels were worse than the soldiers, which is also true, right? And then he says something else much later on, before the coup, so to speak. He says that there are people who, in a war, their power is in their words. When they say whatever they say is what people do, right? That's another clue to who he really is, because he comes from that world. He comes from a place where there are people who control other people with words, and they make them do everything. So once you start to think of Jasper this way, I would say maybe the view of him being a traditional villain might start to change, because we already have a traditional villain in Jabi, right? A more traditional villain. But with Jasper, it's more complex than that. He's really as much a victim as he is a villain. And there's also a commentary about Jasper somewhere in there where, I mean, it's based on real truth. I don't know if you know this, but in a lot of conflict places, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, when the rebels enter these places, these villages, there have been cases like hundreds of thousands. I mean, it was even reported by the UN, hundreds of thousands of cases where the men in those villages were dismembered. And so this is like it's a very real thing. And this Jasper comes from this very real world of being dismembered and having to survive in a place like that. And so in my thought, you know, if such a person was to find himself in heaven, he would try as much as possible to enjoy it. And he does try. I mean, there's no bigger attempt at trying to find peace than, you know, to become a new person. You make a visual, like an actual physical attempt at becoming new. He cut off his hair because he really wants to become, like, that's like a symbol of change. Like the biggest change you can make is to cut off your hair, right? And he cut off his hair because he really wants to change. He really wants to become this new person. But as soon as he encounters Jabi, what happens? You know, survival instincts kick in again. So once you start to understand these layers about Jasper, I think his choices make more sense, I would say.
Yeah, so just as a back on that, and you describing that, it's, to me, articulates or codifies the idea that the villain is, it might be my worldview, but is masculinity, and that his threat is entirely nullified the minute he's emasculated literally in front of people.
Yeah, that's great.
Encountering Jabi thrusts him into this imbalanced, hyper masculine performance of what power looks like, and that becomes a threat to the matriarchal society. But sorry, last thing I want to say was, because I'm sure someone else has a question, but when you were talking about what does it mean to be more African, I often wonder, like, who's judging, and like, who gives you the scorecard? You're like, oh, well done, you're more African. And that I wonder that this film anyway spoke to me in that it's not a binary, it's not a choice between modernity and tradition, but it's about balance and then moving forward. But when you're forced into binaries, which is a very kind of Western concept, then that's where you lose yourself. But thank you so much for your film.
Thank you.
We've got time for one more question.
Just also want to say that it's a beautiful film. I know it's been said several times, but it's worth saying again.
Still like to hear it.
My question is, I don't think all films or all art forms have to be political, but did you have a political like references or commentary that you wanted to show with the film as well, beyond like the things that have been mentioned already?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, yes, they say. First, I like to make kick-ass films. Like, that's my thing. But I think the idea of kick-ass films, when it comes to people don't necessarily apply that to African films. So it's like African films have to be, you know, all political and nothing else. So, and I've wrestled with that idea because, you know, it's kind of like the idea of the film, you know, modernity versus, like, you know, these two opposing. Why does it have to be one or the other? So that's really what I did think it was very political. Just the very idea of making a black and white film with, you know, all dark skin cast. You know, it's a very political thing to do. You can ask anyone that works in a studio; they'll tell you. Think of how casting is done in studio films. Think of the people they cast. Like, it's such. You might not really appreciate it as an outsider, but if you work within the film industry, you will understand more how radical it is to do that. But even beyond that, I mean, there are certainly a lot of symbolisms and ideas that are explored within the context of the film. I mean, obviously we have the neo-colonial aspect of it, which I think is probably the most on the nose thing about the film. I mean, who brings them weapons? A white guy. You know, like, that's probably like the most like obvious on the nose thing that happens in the entire film. Every other thing is pretty much subtle and layered, and you might need to rewatch to see them and to understand. The idea of, I mean, she was talking about Jasper, and one of the things I wanted to say was how interesting it was that Jabi was cool with allowing Jasper run his crew when he thought he was an alpha male. But as soon as he realized he didn't have any private parts, he shot him. But he could have shot him at any moment, you know. So, but he never did, because he had an idea of what it meant to be an alpha male, a top man, you know. And I thought that was important, because all the while he's spinning this yarn about good schools, hospitals, and all that crap, which is it's not a bad thing, right? I mean, it would be nice, right, if they could get a couple of hospitals or whatever, but that's not what it was about at the end of the day, right? So it's this, I mean, we have a term for, we call it toxic masculinity now, but just the idea of what we think to be a man, or what we think to be, a woman, that's why it was also important to see Priska and Zinwe do certain things. If you had a society that is, I mean, I hate to use like these Western words like matriarchy and patriarchy, but that's really what it is, right? I mean, if we had a society like in real life, and in a lot of rural villages in West Africa, you have the cults of Mami Wata that are run by women. In fact, you have actual Mama Efes in those places, and we met some of them when we were in Benin Republic just to make the movie. But in those situations, or in those particular places, if they were at a certain time, it wouldn't be an issue for someone to ride a bike. It wouldn't be an issue for them to wrestle. It wouldn't be, none of those things would even come into question. It wouldn't be something that they thought about. It just would be the natural order of things, right? So it's just the idea of exploring what is natural or what is not natural, or what we consider to be natural or not natural,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, CJ. Thank you for sharing this beautifully subversive, charged vision with us. I think it's a film that lots of people are going to be talking about, and that, suggests a very, very exciting career ahead for you. And we're delighted that you were able to spend some time with us. Please give him a round of applause. Again,